Welcome back to another episode of Lush Life, No Labels, a podcast where I talk about the struggles and joys of self improvement, anywhere from relationships, career, wellness, and more. I'm Fatu. My story of the week this week is about a 5 a.m. challenge that I read about. This 5 a.m. challenge, the goal was for people who participated to, quote, be more productive, get more done. It was meant for people from all walks of life. Now, the stipulations of the challenge were to wake up at 5 a.m. every day, which was likely significantly earlier than most people's standard wake up time. Ultimately, the challenge was saying if you get up at 5 a.m., it gives you more time in the day and boosts your productivity. Participants could do anything that they wanted, but most people decided to read, exercise, or meditate early in the morning. And then, of course, people would invite their friends and family to join and maybe hold them accountable because it is hard to wake up at 5 a.m. I've tried, it is not easy. I noticed, though, that there were some issues with this challenge because it was meant for people of all walks of life. But realistically, not everyone can wake up at 5 a.m. due to their life. For example, if someone works the graveyard shift and overnight and they don't get off until 8 a.m., obviously they can't participate in this challenge. If someone is a parent, they're likely not going to be able to do it because even if they wake up that early, maybe they're trying to get their kids ready for school or take care of toddlers or a newborn. The people who could participate in this challenge ultimately had a privilege that allowed them to take advantage of a schedule that aligns with a typical 9 to 5 lifestyle. And the challenge itself was about time. It was about having the flexibility in your schedule to be able to actually do this challenge and also having the space to make any changes that they wanted to. So, in the article that I read about this challenge, the writer did not bash the challenge because certainly we could all be more intentional about how we spend our time when we go to sleep and the concept of thoughtful planning overall. But sometimes, though, it's important to recognize that not everyone has the ability to make these types of challenges or the time even to be making these types of changes, especially changes that we deem as self improvement. And that story of the week actually leads into my topic for today, which is around the privilege of self improvement and sort of questioning who gets to grow and in what ways do they have the ability to grow. It's funny because this podcast obviously is about self improvement, and self improvement is sold as something that anyone can do. Self improvement is about following habits that you feel benefit your life. And this can mean different things for different people. But what if the freedom to find yourself can be a privilege? We hear so much about self care, self growth, and becoming our best selves, especially me, like I said, with this podcast. But behind that message, there's a bitter truth that self improvement often takes time, money, and access. And I don't really hear people talk much about that. So, really, what I want to explore in today's podcast episode is whether self improvement is equally accessible to everyone, or does it depend on socioeconomic status, identity, and privilege? I want to explore some of this curiosity that I've had around this, given that it is the foundation of this podcast. So it might seem like it goes against what the podcast is, but if you've heard any of my episodes, you know that I like to take different lenses around these things, and I do like to challenge the status quo in a way and really want you as the listener to get a different perspective that maybe you or other people in your life haven't really thought about. And to be clear, there's nothing wrong with having privilege, and there is no one size fits all. Ideally, everyone would have the space to improve themselves in ways that they want, but that's not often reality for everyone who wants to improve themselves because some people, frankly, don't want to, and that is their prerogative. Let's jump in and start with the obvious. The self improvement industry often presents a one size fits all approach. It ignores how socioeconomic status, access, and identity can affect someone's ability to, quote, pull themselves up by their bootstraps, as we are told in the US at least. Therapy, gym memberships, wellness retreats, and even healthy food, they all come with price tags. And if you're working, let's say, two jobs or raising kids or being a caretaker for an older family member, me time isn't really self care. It becomes a luxury. And when I scroll through wellness content online, it's pretty easy to forget that investing in yourself assumes you have something left to invest. I actually talked about this briefly in my Investment 101 podcast episode. Feel free to listen to that. But one of the things that I emphasize in that episode is that yes, investing is helpful. Investing can help you grow your money, but you have to have something to invest. If you are living paycheck to paycheck and all of your money is going to your housing, your transportation, your food, you're not going to have much left to actually invest to grow that extra money. So I do want to call that out in that this type of investing, you have to have something to be able to do that, whether it's money or time. And the truth is, growth doesn't always look like yoga studios and green juice. Sometimes self improvement is just giving yourself permission to rest without guilt or saying no for the first time, like I mentioned in my people pleasing episode. So, yes, self improvement can be a privilege. In my opinion, it's also a human need, and that's where the tension lives if you don't have the means to fulfill that need. Now, there's a self improvement craze that I've noticed in the last few years, and I'm also on that craze. Now, self improvement comes from the desire to fix or make something better in your life. You might feel like you are falling short on something and want that to be changed, or you have some habits that you want to get rid of for all good intentions. Let's say you want to keep better track of your goals or things you want to do. You might decide to get a planner or set some goals. Maybe you want to have a better routine in the morning, like in that 5 a.m. challenge I talked about in my story of the week. So you start journaling or drinking lemon water before you start getting ready for work. However, just like with anything else, doing too much of something is not healthy. And constantly trying to fix your life can take a toll too, especially if you're afraid of slipping up on your new habit, and it could become draining for you. Also, we are not in a constant state of improvement. I've mentioned this in previous episodes as well. Just because this podcast focuses on self improvement doesn't mean every single episode I have is focused on that. Because I'm not constantly just thinking about improving all the time. Most of the time, I am just living my life just like my listener. Sometimes you take two steps forward and one step back, especially since life is unpredictable. So I want to just start with that it's not like you need to be improving all the time. I don't think any of us can constantly be improving anyways, and it's a really easy way to burn yourself out. So definitely keep that in mind throughout this episode. One of the things I talked about at the top of this episode is that self-improvement can be hindered by not having socioeconomic privilege. The concept that your ability to focus on personal growth is directly linked to having your basic needs met. For example, I could discuss how a person with multiple jobs and housing instability may not have the luxury of time or energy to find themselves or pursue mindfulness. So, in this case, having the time is privilege in itself. And that's why oftentimes you see a lot of people with money, they have the privilege of time. They can have someone be hired to come and clean their home, and that gives them time to do something else. For example, people with multiple jobs or caretaking roles may not have the time to focus on working on themselves when they're worried about paying their bills, living paycheck to paycheck, or having other challenges or other people that they need to focus on. Another thing that's tied with The privilege of self growth is the cost of the self care itself. And that is the business of self improvement. Many popular self care practices, like expensive fitness classes, retreats, or health supplements, are inaccessible to the average person. This topic challenges the commercialization of wellness and offers that different perspective on genuine self care. Let's say you want to work out, but you can't afford a gym membership at Equinox or some other bougie gym that has a sauna and red light therapy and a salt bath. What can you do? Well, I've talked about this previously, but one of the things that you can do is go work out at home. You could go to YouTube University. There are a number of free workouts that are accessible there. However, let's say that you want to use machines, you want a treadmill because that's easier for you. You don't have space to work out at home. Then you're forced to kind of seek out something else in order to be able to do those workouts or try to figure out if there's a cheap gym near you. There's even a cost to healthy eating. Produce, fruits, fresh food meats. Those are things that can cost a lot more money. Frozen versus processed things, olive oil versus vegetable or canola oil. All of these things you'll notice the quote healthier things like fresh foods, fresh meats, or oils like olive oil tend to be more expensive than frozen things, processed goods, and canola oil. But the people who can afford those higher priced items to be able to have a healthier diet have more money. And I won't get into things like food deserts, but that is a whole other beast. And for those of you who don't know, a food desert is essentially an area where there aren't grocery stores that carry fresh foods. So there's not going to be a Whole Foods or an Aldi next to them, but the things in their neighborhood immediately may be a McDonald's or other fast foods, which are cheaper, but it's much further or much more expensive to go to a grocery store. And that's another area of socioeconomic difference. Self improvement in the US sometimes assumes you have disposable income and free time. Because ultimately, what does showing up for yourself mean when you're just trying to make ends meet? It might be hard to define. Wellness has become an industry selling products instead of promoting access or equity. For example, right? People could promote YouTube videos or promote other ways to do free exercise, like running outside. But they don't. They promote going to certain gyms and buying certain workout equipment. Luxury wellness routines versus community based healing or low cost mental health tools. We don't really hear people talk a lot about the latter half of that. I hear people talk a lot about luxury wellness routines, but not as much about communities based healing or low cost mental health tools. Maybe self care isn't defined as a yoga retreat, it's allowing yourself to rest without guilt for some people. However, for some people, rest is not a luxury that they have. And again, that's not the fault of people who have the luxury to do so. It's just pointing out something that I don't really hear people talk about very much. So I guess this episode is really more about awareness than anything else. Like I said, self care has become an industry and $1 billion one at that. We're sold products to fix us, apps to calm us, and systems to make us more mindful. But if the cure for burnout costs $300, is that really self care or another form of consumption? True self care to me ultimately isn't something that you buy, it's something that you practice, like setting boundaries, choosing rest, or showing up for your community. And the most powerful form of self improvement might just be accepting who you are and what you have. Identity also plays a role in self improvement or the desire to want to grow. Self acceptance and self improvement are viewed differently depending on someone's identity. Privilege doesn't just show up in our wallets, like I just talked about, it can also show up in those identities. A lot of mainstream self help that I see, and that's probably because I live in the US, comes from a Western individualistic mindset, as in control your destiny, manifest your goals, and optimize everything. And that's probably a message that I've conveyed on many episodes of this podcast. But for many people, especially people in marginalized communities, life doesn't always work that way. For example, some marginalized people may face external pressures to change or improve themselves to fit in, while simultaneously being told just to be themselves. If you've grown up with instability, discrimination, or constant external judgment, then self acceptance isn't just an inner journey, but it can be an active resistance. For some people, working all the time is seen as grind culture, but that is survival for them. Whereas other people may see grind culture as a toxic hustle. And while some people are praised for taking a break, others may be labeled lazy. Some people are encouraged to speak up, while others are told they're too loud. Actually, the one example that comes to mind for me for that is being a Black woman, because oftentimes there's a stereotype of an angry Black woman if you speak up. I've said this in a previous episode around people pleasing, where I kept my mouth shut even when I was being mistreated. Whereas I could see other people who were white, they could speak up without consequence. But when I eventually spoke up, I was seen as an angry Black woman. And that's just a privilege I didn't have. But even speaking up for me was a form of self improvement and a form of resistance that I had to step into because that was not afforded to me beforehand. And that's why it's always important to remember that self improvement does not happen in a vacuum. It's shaped by culture, by safety, by belonging. For some of us, becoming our best selves simply starts with being allowed to take up space as we are. It's important to also just live your life and see where it takes you. We don't get to choose the circumstances of our birth and upbringing. And being privileged should not be seen as a negative, especially for people who are certainly aware of their privilege. Self improvement doesn't have to mean doing more. Sometimes it means doing something differently, being aware of your limits, your circumstances, and your privileges. It's about shifting from how can I fix myself to how can I support myself? Because there's not necessarily things that need to be always fixed about us. And growth doesn't always look like reaching higher. Sometimes it looks like rooting deeper into what you already have. You could be completely satisfied with where you are. That's great. And maybe it's just about continuing to be firm in who you are and what it is that you have decided you like to do. The privilege of self improvement doesn't mean that some people don't deserve it. In fact, for me, it means we all do. It's just that not everyone gets equal access. And maybe part of growing is seeing that truth clearly and finding ways to make peace for others to grow too. I mentioned community. Community is a great way to improve and to have more equal access. Maybe I can't afford to go to a gym and do Pilates reformer classes because it's so expensive. And maybe it's hard for me to work out at home because I don't have enough space. It might be a good idea to host a free meetup outside where everyone can bring their Pilates mats and we can all do something together watching a YouTube video. That's a random example, but that's one way that we can still improve without having the access, and we can make our own access. So if you've ever felt like you're behind or like you're not doing enough, remember that your circumstances don't define your worth. Ultimately, I wouldn't think of life like a race. I've heard someone say life is more like a garden. A garden is never done. Instead, it's made and remade and maintained as a continual process. That doesn't mean it never gets easier. There are certainly moments where your garden is completely fine and you're easing your way through it. But then there may be other times where weeds start to grow in the garden and now you have to put in more effort to get those weeds out. Nobody is perfect. There's always something to learn and or relearn. If you get rid of one flaw, there might be another flaw to work on. It's just a fact of life, again, because we're not perfect. Every decade of life asks for different things of you and will challenge you in new and unexpected ways. That alone already makes it impossible to live life flawlessly. Maybe instead of classifying things into acceptable and unacceptable, try to think about it in school grades. Getting a B means you've made mistakes and that there are things to work on, sure. But does that mean a B is bad or unacceptable? Of course not. Getting a B is good. Having flaws doesn't mean you shouldn't accept yourself as who you are. You should do that and acknowledge that you have things to work on. We all do. You won't be improving every step of the way, nor should you expect yourself to. Give yourself grace in your setbacks. Allow yourself to rest when you are tired. These actions are all in service to the long term goal of self improvement so that you can show up better for yourself and better for others if that's where you want to be. I will end it there for today. But one question I have for you to think about as you listen to this episode is, what does improvement mean to you right now? Not as an ideal, but as a reality. Thanks for listening to another episode of Lush Life, No Labels. If this episode made you think differently about growth, share it with someone who's questioning what self improvement really means. Like and subscribe to this podcast. Cheers to your lush life, and see you later.